They're responding to the noise, Peterson yelled, pressed against the helicopter's frame. The rotors, the gunfire, it's drawing them. She was right. With each burst from my minigun, more heads turned our way, more bodies converged on our position. I switched to single shots, picking targets carefully. A former soldier in PT gear stumbled forward, his left arm hanging by tendons, right eye missing. I placed a round directly into his remaining eye, and he crumpled like a discarded uniform. "Fuel at 60%, Derek called out. "That'll have to do." "Get on board," I shouted to Cooper, who slammed the fuel line disconnect and sprinted for the cabin. An infected woman in civilian clothes lunged for him. Fingers curved like talons, spine bent at an angle that would break a living person's back. I caught her in the shoulder with a burst from the minigun, the round separating her arm from her body. She barely registered the loss, continuing forward until a final shot to her head turned her momentum into a graceless tumble. We lifted off just as the infected reached our position, narrowly escaping grasping hands. As we gained altitude, I watched Fort Bragg spread out below us. America's military might reduce to pockets of desperate resistance, fires burning in multiple barracks, vehicles abandoned on parade grounds. The morning sun cast long shadows across what now looked like a battlefield after a devastating defeat. Adams received new orders through the tactical radio, his face tightening as he listened. "Change of plans," he announced. "Command wants us back out there. We've got extraction assignments, high-value personnel who need immediate evac." "What about Fort Bragg?" Cooper asked, gesturing to the chaos below. "We're just abandoning it?" "It's being systematically evacuated," Adams replied. "Special forces are establishing safe zones within the perimeter. Our job is to pull out priority targets while those zones are secured." Derek adjusted our course, banking eastward. First coordinates received. Research facility 5 miles out. The building came into view after a tense few minutes of flight, a modern 3-story structure nestled against a wooded area. Even from a distance, I could see it was surrounded by infected, many still wearing lab coats and security uniforms. They moved in concentric circles around the building, a bizarre orbit of broken bodies drawn by something inside. "I count at least 50 infected on the ground," I reported. "No clear landing zone." "Rooftop," Adams pointed. "We've got survivors up there." Sure enough, a small group had barricaded themselves on the roof, using furniture to block the access door that bulged outward with each impact from those trapped inside. One figure spotted our approach and began waving frantically, a bright red cloth held aloft like a flag of desperation. "Nighthawk 3, approaching target," Derek radioed. "Requesting situation update." "Thank God," came the reply. A woman's voice strained but professional. "This is Dr. Norton. We have the research samples and 5 personnel. The stairwell is compromised. We need immediate extraction." Derek brought us into a hover 20 feet above the rooftop. The wash from our rotors sent loose papers swirling around the survivors, who shielded their eyes while maintaining their positions around the barricaded door. I provided covering fire while Cooper prepared the extraction line. "Be ready to move fast," Cooper called to the survivors through his headset's external speaker. "We'll drop the line, secure yourselves one at a time." The first researcher had just reached for the line when the rooftop door splintered open, the furniture barricade collapsing inward. 3 infected security guards spilled out, their movements disjointed, bones visibly shifted beneath skin as they scrambled toward the researchers. One guard's jaw hung completely detached on one side, swinging grotesquely with each step. Another had a gaping chest wound, ribs protruding like pale fingers from the cavity. I opened fire immediately, the round shredding through the first infected. Its skull exploded in a spray of bone and matter, body dropping instantly. The second took rounds to the torso but kept coming, organs visible through the exit wounds, feet still pushing forward with mechanical persistence. I adjusted my aim, catching it in the neck and removing its head entirely. The third infected, moving with terrible speed, grabbed one researcher's ankle before I could adjust my aim. The man fell screaming, papers and equipment scattering across the rooftop. I watched in horror as the infected, despite missing its jaw, still managed to tear into his calf with broken teeth and gums. "He's bit," another researcher shouted, a balding man clutching a laptop to his chest. "We can't take him. We have to," cried a woman in a blood-stained lab coat, clutching sealed containers. "He has half the samples." The bitten researcher, young, maybe early 30s, looked up, understanding dawning in his eyes. Without hesitation, he shoved the sample case toward his colleagues, then turned and threw himself at the approaching infected emerging from the stairwell, buying precious seconds for the others to board. "Go!" he shouted, voice already thick with pain. "I'm already dead." I couldn't watch. Instead, I focused on covering the remaining survivors as they scrambled up the extraction line into the helicopter. 4 scientists plus the sample case made it aboard before Derek had to pull away, the rooftop now swarming with infected pouring through the broken door like ants from a disturbed hill. The last thing I saw as we banked away was the bitten researcher, now surrounded, still fighting with the desperation of the damned. Inside our helicopter, the survivors collapsed into exhausted heaps, breath coming in ragged gasps. One woman wept quietly, face buried in her hands. The others stared blankly, minds still processing the horrors they'd witnessed and the colleague they'd left behind. "We've got another pickup, 2 miles north," Adams announced as we gained altitude. "Military intelligence officer with critical communications equipment." "What the hell is happening?" demanded the balding scientist, finally finding his voice. "Is it like this everywhere?" Adams glanced back, his expression grim. "Reports of similar outbreaks across the eastern seaboard. That's all we know for certain." The woman with the sample case clutched it like a lifeline, knuckles white against the metal. "We were studying tissue samples when the first staff members turned," she said quietly. "No warning signs, no incubation period we could detect. 1 minute they were fine, the next..." She trailed off, eyes unfocused, remembering something too horrific to share. "What's in the case?" Cooper asked during a moment of relative quiet. "Tissue samples," she replied shakily. "From the first cases. Blood work, cellular analysis. If we're going to understand this thing, create a treatment..." She didn't finish the thought. None of us mentioned that her colleague had just sacrificed himself. The cold mathematics of survival was already becoming normal. Our second extraction took us to a residential area near the base, upscale homes where senior officers and their families lived. The target was a colonial-style house surrounded by a hastily constructed barricade of vehicles and lawn furniture. A small team of soldiers maintained a defensive perimeter, but they were clearly overwhelmed, infected pressing in from all sides like a tide of twisted flesh. "There's no LZ, I reported. Scanning the area through my sights. "They're completely surrounded." "Then we make one," Adams decided. "Weapons free. Clear them a path." I opened fire, the minigun tearing through the mass of infected surrounding the house. Bodies fell in heaps, creating momentary gaps in the horde. Limbs, heads and torsos separated under the barrage, but still they came, somehow more terrifying in pieces than whole. An infected missing both legs continued crawling forward, intestines dragging behind it like a grotesque tail. The defenders seized the opportunity, forming a tight circle around a man in civilian clothes carrying a metal briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. They moved in perfect synchronization, veterans who'd clearly seen combat together before this nightmare began. "Going in," Derek announced, bringing us down into the cleared area. The rotors kicked up debris and blood spray as we touched down on the front lawn. The copper smell intensified, hot blood vaporizing in the rotor wash, filling my nostrils with the unmistakable scent of slaughter. "Move, move, move!" I shouted as the team rushed toward us. The intelligence officer made it aboard with 3 of his security detail, professionals who moved with the economy of special forces. 2 more soldiers provided covering fire, but were quickly overwhelmed as the infected used the bodies of their fallen as ramps to climb over the barricade. Their techniques were sophisticated, controlled bursts, perfect headshots, but the sheer numbers made their position untenable. "We have to go!" Cooper yelled as the infected closed in from all sides, their moans now a constant background noise like rolling thunder. Wait! One of the soldiers, staff sergeant by his insignia, turned back toward the house. There's a family inside. Before anyone could stop him, he sprinted back through the front door. The intelligence officer cursed sharply, then shook his head. We need to extract now, he insisted, voice tight with urgency. That's not part of the mission. Adams hesitated, clearly torn between orders and leaving men behind. 30 seconds, he decided. Not a second more. Seconds stretched into agonizing minutes as the infected closed in around us. Each one that fell to my gun seemed replaced by 3 more, emerging from between houses, stumbling out of garages, pouring over the makeshift barricades. We can't wait, Derek shouted, hands tight on the controls. Just as Adams was about to give the order to lift off, the soldier reappeared, carrying a young boy in his arms while a woman and teenage girl followed close behind. They ran toward us, the infected at their heels. I laid down suppressive fire, creating a corridor for them to reach us. Go, 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 I screamed above the roar of the minigun. The family scrambled aboard, the woman sobbing incoherent thanks. But the soldier stumbled just feet from safety, an infected latching onto his back like a demented jockey. I watched in horror as teeth sank into his neck, tearing away a chunk of flesh that glistened wetly in the morning light. Go, he screamed, eyes meeting mine with grim acceptance as blood poured down his collar. Derek lifted off immediately, the sudden acceleration throwing us against our seats. Through my gun sights, I watched the soldier disappear beneath a wave of infected, his sacrifice buying the family's survival. A father maybe or brother had just traded his life for theirs. The intelligence officer clutched his briefcase, knuckles white. He wasn't supposed to do that, he said quietly, almost to himself. The family wasn't on the extraction list. No one responded. What could we say? The woman hugged her children close. Understanding their salvation had come at a terrible cost. The teenage girl stared out the window, eyes tracking the spot where the soldier had fallen until it disappeared from view. Where are we taking them? I asked Adams quietly. Green Zone Charlie, he replied. Being established at the base gymnasium. It's the most secure structure left. The implications weren't lost on me. We were creating lifeboat situations, deciding who got saved and who was left to fend for themselves. I'd seen it in war zones, but never expected to face these choices on American soil. Over the next several hours, we completed 3 more extractions. A CDC virologist trapped in her apartment, surrounded by infected neighbors who'd responded to her panicked phone calls by smashing through her door. A power plant engineer with knowledge of maintaining grid operations, found hiding in an industrial freezer, while his colleagues, now infected, clawed at the heavy door. A communications specialist who barricaded himself in a radio tower, using furniture to block the only staircase access. Each pickup was more desperate than the last, the infected growing in numbers, the safe areas shrinking. The green zone at Fort Bragg swelled with evacuees, but for everyone we saved, dozens were left behind. The mathematics of the situation were brutally clear. There was no saving everyone, not even close. By mid-afternoon, my arms ached from the constant recoil of the minigun. My ears rang despite the headset protection. My eyes burned from staring through targeting sights at scenes no human should witness. But we kept going, because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant surrender to the nightmare. During a brief fuel stop at the Green Zone, I caught a glimpse of what had become our last bastion of civilization. The gymnasium had been transformed into a triage center and command post. Military cots lined the basketball courts, filled with evacuees in varying states of shock. Medical personnel moved among them, checking for bites or signs of infection, administering sedatives to the most hysterical. Armed guards stood at every entrance, their faces masked, but eyes visible. And in those eyes, I saw the same haunted look I felt in my own. They knew. We all knew. This was just forestalling the inevitable. The infection was spreading too fast, the military response too fragmented. By late afternoon, the tactical map showed only small pockets of resistance remaining. Fort Bragg, once a fortress of military might, had been reduced to isolated strongholds. each fighting their own desperate battle for survival. Our sixth extraction brought us to a church 3 miles from base, a simple white steeple rising above the chaos like a final prayer. The parking lot was filled with vehicles arranged in a protective circle, defenders firing from behind them at the infected that streamed from nearby houses and businesses. "This isn't a scheduled extraction," Cooper noted as we approached. "Who are we picking up?" "Change of plans," Adams replied, checking a message on his tactical display. "The pastor down there has been organizing evacuations, getting civilians to safety. Command wants him extracted. Says he's got skills we need for managing the civilian population at the green zone." As we descended, I got a clear view of the defenders. Not military, but civilians with hunting rifles and shotguns. They fought with the desperation of people protecting their families. Their shots less precise, but no less determined than trained soldiers. The pastor, a tall black man with graying temples, directed the defense with remarkable calm, moving between positions to encourage his makeshift militia. When he spotted our approach, he immediately began organizing people for evacuation, prioritizing children and the elderly. "We can't take everyone," Adams warned over the external speakers as we touched down. "Pastor Williams and 10 others, max." The pastor's face fell, but he nodded grimly, making rapid calculations. He selected key defenders and several children, helping them aboard while maintaining his position. An elderly woman clutched his arm, begging him to take more people. "We'll send more helicopters," he promised, though we all knew it might not be true. "Just hold on a little longer." As we lifted off, the pastor stared back at his church, at the people he'd left behind. His lips moved in what might have been a prayer or a promise. The children cried silently, pressed against the adults who'd made it aboard. "Will there be more helicopters?" the pastor asked quietly once we'd gained altitude. Adams couldn't meet his eyes. "We're doing everything we can." It wasn't an answer, but it was the only one we had. "New orders," Adams announced as we completed the extraction. "All remaining air assets are being directed to support the naval station at Norfolk. It's being established as the primary evacuation point for the eastern seaboard." "What about the people we leave behind?" Cooper asked, voicing what we were all thinking. "Secure zones are being established at key locations," Adams replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "Once naval assets are secured, support missions will resume." The pastor looked between us, reading the subtext in our expressions. "You're not coming back," he said. It wasn't a question. "Not today," Adams admitted. "But once the naval base is secure, it becomes our forward operating position. We'll launch missions from there, establish supply corridors to the green zones." None of us mentioned that by then. It might be too late for many we'd left behind. The flight to Norfolk took 40 minutes. Our helicopter heavy with the assortment of VIPs we'd extracted throughout the day. Most sat in silence, staring at nothing, their minds still processing what they'd witnessed. The family the soldier had saved clung to each other, the boy's face buried in his mother's shoulder. I kept watch through my gun sights, monitoring the landscape below. The infection had spread along highways and through suburbs, following the natural pathways of human movement. Small groups of survivors had taken refuge on water towers, billboards, anywhere the infected couldn't easily reach. Some waved desperately at our passing helicopter, but we had nowhere to put them, no way to save them all. Norfolk Naval Station came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Even from a distance, the massive facility looked like an anthill that had been kicked, frantic activity everywhere. Ships preparing to depart, helicopters and planes constantly in motion. "Nighthawk 3, this is Norfolk Control," the radio crackled. "You are cleared for landing on Pier 14. Approach from the east. Be advised all personnel will undergo medical screening before facility access is granted." "Copy that," Derek replied, approaching from the east. As we descended toward the designated landing area, I had my first clear view of what awaited us. The naval station had established a formidable defensive perimeter. Walls of shipping containers, military vehicles, and barbed wire. Armed sailors patrolled in full combat gear, while medical personnel in hazmat suits processed the steady stream of arrivals. Beyond the walls, I could see the civilian side of Norfolk. Fires burned throughout the city.